So, can you tell me how much inheritance you received from your father?
At what? That day had just ended with my father's funeral. In the heavy air of that night, my husband Daniel suddenly brought up the topic of inheritance.
I heard that your father left a fortune of around $3 million. How much of that ended up in your hands?
My heart was still trembling with sorrow from my father's death, but faced with an inconvenient question from my husband, I impulsively lied. I didn't receive anything. The inheritance was decided to be inherited by my younger sister and mother. At this lie, Daniel's face broke into a smile, pleased with the situation.
I see. As I thought, you weren't valued that much in your parents' home. My prediction was spot on. I've decided, we're getting a divorce. I can't be with you any longer as you bring misfortune. I've already found someone else to remarry, so please disappear from this place.
Just as my husband wished, I ended up signing the divorce papers. My husband and my family mocked me for being at my lowest, but ironically, they misunderstood the joy that this betrayal brought me. They still couldn't comprehend it. My name is Nancy. I have a younger sister named Kelly, and we are a family of 4. However, from a young age, there has never been a lack of quarrels between my sister and me. Especially my mother would always take my sister's side in every little argument, which made me feel constantly isolated. My father was the only one on my side, but he was almost never home to work, so I grew up isolated in my parents' house. Even as an adult, the situation didn't change. I had no choice but to give up on going to college. But as soon as I secured a job, I was informed that my sister was going to a private university.
Kelly is doing so well academically. There's no way we can't send her to college. Nancy, on the other hand, is slow and inefficient. It would be a waste of time even if she went. You are already a working adult. You'll be contributing to the household finances. And in addition to that, please take care of Kelly's tuition. You're her older sister, so it's only natural for you to support your younger sister, right?
Mom just laid it all out as if she was speaking the absolute truth. I've been patiently enduring the unfairness up to now, but I couldn't help but cry and feel indignant about this matter. Seeing my reaction, my younger sister, who clearly showed her disgust, bluntly said the following. My younger sister, Kelly, is like a ball of self-esteem. She has absolute confidence in her own abilities and often looks down on me with that attitude. Her words are often sharp, and they can leave deep wounds in my self-esteem.
Isn't it because you lack the ability? I'm better looking and I have better grades than you. That's why you should at least try to put in some effort yourself. It's really disappointing that you can't even do that basic thing.
Unable to bear such a heartless family environment any longer, I decided to get a job and move out of the house. Thanks to being forced to do housework since I was a child, I had no trouble living on my own. In fact, I felt comfortable with my newfound freedom. For the first few months, my father continued to send me a little bit of money, but suddenly, that support came to an end. Instead, I received an unexpected letter from my mother.
It seems that your father has been sending you money on his own. However, you haven't contributed to your sister's tuition or financially assisted your parents' home at all, so you have no right to receive that money. Soon, I will send you a bill for the equivalent amount of money you should have received up to now, and you will repay that amount. Continuing to steal is not allowed.
Holding the cold letter from my mother, which lacked any emotion, and the bill meticulously calculated, I was so disgusted that I no longer wanted to interact with her. Reluctantly, I decided to send the designated amount of money. To put an end to it all in my heart, and to avoid any new turmoil, I secretly moved to another apartment. Time passed, and I decided to marry a kind-hearted man named Daniel, whom I met at work. At this significant turning point, I decided not to start my new life carrying the past with me. I wanted to cut ties with my parents' house. To report the engagement in person, I knocked on the door of my parents' house for the first time in many years. There I saw my father, who used to work tirelessly as the breadwinner of the family. However, the weight of time was heavily etched on his face, and it was hard to find any trace of his former self. The once dignified figure of my father was now diminished by his bent back, and every time he stood up, he couldn't hide the pain. Upon seeing me, my mother let out a bitter voice.
Oh, you've finally decided to come back. You're such an ungrateful daughter, never showing any gratitude or sending money back home. What do you want now?
When I asked about my father, my mother answered reluctantly, yet with a sense of superiority.
Your father, you know, he's been having back problems since last year. He can't go to work anymore and just sits at home all day. He's really in the way. He's slow at everything, just like when you were living here. Truly, both of you are so useless.
Daniel couldn't hide his surprise at the atmosphere in the room, but as soon as my younger sister Kelly entered, he was captivated by her beauty.
Are you Nancy's sister, Kelly? You're incredibly beautiful. I can hardly believe you two are sisters.
Daniel praised Kelly to the skies. Since entering college, my younger sister Kelly had become increasingly selfish, and now, as a full-fledged adult, she was embarrassingly flamboyant in both her clothing and hair color. Despite being old enough to have graduated from college, she seemed unable to shake off her student mindset, evident in her lack of a proper attitude towards learning. In front of me, Kelly flirtatiously made gestures and pretended to touch Daniel, as if she was putting on a show. Not only was this behavior unpleasant, but seeing Daniel drawn to such a sister caused me deep pain. I stated quietly, "I won't be staying here long. I've decided to marry Daniel. And with that, I'm ending my relationship with this house as well." Mother, while indifferently eating snacks.
If you're planning to cut ties, could you at least wait until your father's caregiving is over?
Mother said,
He needs caregiving now. But I really don't want to do it, and I don't want to burden Kelly with such a demanding role either. She's enjoying her life as a working adult right now. It would be a misfortune for her to waste her time on such a trivial matter, don't you think? So, Nancy, you take care of your father. The two of you are equally incompetent, so it should work out just fine.
Mother declared. I didn't even have the luxury to feel anger at my mother's sudden demand. Nevertheless, considering my sick father, I had no choice but to follow my mother's words. Thus, my life took a sudden turn, with frequent trips back home and a new routine of caregiving. It was only after this caregiving life began that it became clear that not a single family member was working. My younger sister showed no signs of looking for a part-time job, even in her free time. Meanwhile, my mother had confined herself inside the house since her husband fell ill. However, when it came to shopping or dining out, the two of them spent money lavishly. They led a life of luxury, splurging without hesitation. Behind this wasteful spending was the father's savings, as he was unable to work. They were using their father's bank book and wasting his savings without his permission. I couldn't believe that my father had remained silent about this fact even though he was aware of it. When I asked my father why, he spoke wearily.
Nancy, even if I tell you, the more you do, the heavier the burden on your shoulders becomes. They won't change, and I don't want to put any more hardship on you. You've already been through enough.
I spoke with a voice mixed with resignation and sorrow. When I thought about my father, I pictured him as the center of the family, constantly working hard. He was a unique presence, pouring devoted love into me, and I felt determined to save him. Then suddenly, I received news of my father's ill health from the hospital. In this urgent situation, I felt the need to rush to my father's side immediately. However, I decided to visit my parents' house first. There, I saw the calm figures of my mother and sister Kelly in the living room. They were glued to the television, unfazed by my entrance, completely lost in the program. When I asked my mother about the call from the hospital,
"Oh, your father. He just fell and bumped his head a little. They took him in an ambulance, so he's fine now. There's no need for you to go out of your way to do anything."
my mother answered lightly. However, when I insisted, "But I need to go to the hospital. I'm worried about Dad," my mother became colder.
Now, don't get so heated. Even if something happens, we'll get insurance money, so we'll manage. There's really nothing to worry about.
My mother dismissively stated. Despite feeling deep disappointment and anger inside due to my mother's cold response, I left the scene immediately and headed straight to the hospital. Upon arrival, I found my father connected to numerous tubes and wires, lying unconscious and in a drowsy state. As I approached softly, my father somehow managed to open his eyes, recognizing my presence and faintly uttering a sound. With an exhausted expression, he apologized for the sudden turmoil.
I'm sorry, Nancy. This has all happened so suddenly. I think this must be a punishment from the heavens for my accumulated sins. I've failed in my duties as a family protector, as a father.
Leaving these words behind, he quietly closed his eyes, never to open them again. With a trembling voice, I responded, "That's not true. It's okay. I have always loved you, Dad. So please get better and come back." Beside the white hospital bed, I desperately clung to my father's gradually cooling hand, but he never squeezed back. About a week later, I received a phone call. It was from a lawyer entrusted with my father's will.
According to the will, the assets left behind, which amount to a total of $3 million, are designated to be inherited by you, Nancy,
Said the lawyer calmly. $3 million. I repeated, disbelief filling my voice. In fact, the bank book my mother held was the one my father made public to the family. Unbeknownst to anyone, he had another bank book, secretly stashed away, containing a whopping $3 million. The information about this secret asset was to be inherited by me alone, without the knowledge of the rest of the family, as instructed in the will. This was a thoughtful consideration from my father, concerned about my life after inheriting the assets. Knowing this new fact, I was deeply moved by my father's profound love and consideration, my heart swelling with gratitude and emotion. It was after my father's death that I learned the truth about the hidden legacy. Seeking the bank book, I headed to my parents' house, only to find my mother and sister, Kelly, standing at the entrance with hostile postures, seemingly blocking my way. With a suspicious gaze, my mother looked at me and asked in a chilly tone,
"What are you here for? Dad has left this world, and now what are you prowling around for? Money? Property? It's really a vulgar story, isn't it?"
Kelly also didn't try to hide her challenging attitude at all.
Everything in this house will be inherited by us. The house, the car, everything that Dad left here. So we don't need people like you, who steal from graves, around here.
The two of them wouldn't listen to anything I said, and I was just confused. Wait a minute. I came here just to take back the items filled with Dad's precious memories. Plus, if this is about inheritance, I should have legal rights too. At that moment, my mother, as if to interrupt my words, pulled out a piece of paper and showed it to me. It was clearly a new will, and it stated that all of our father's assets were to be passed on to my mother and Kelly. However, the handwriting was obviously Kelly's at just one glance. It was clearly different from the sophisticated writing our father had shown while he was alive, and a rough and arrogant penmanship was there. With a trembling voice, I asked, "Is this really a will written by Dad?" My heart was filled with anger and confusion in front of this unbelievable document.
No matter what you think, this document is the will. The content here is well known not only to the entire family, but also to the neighbors. It's impossible to change this will now, no matter what you say.
And with that, I was not even allowed to set foot in the house and had no choice but to reluctantly head home that day. However, Daniel was waiting for me on my way back.
Did you go to your parents' house? If you had told me a little earlier, I would have accompanied you. That's a shame. I wanted to meet your sister too.
It's none of Daniel's business. I went to check on the assets left by my father, but in the end, I was turned away without being allowed to set foot in the house.
I see. So specifically, how much is the inheritance from your father?
I'm not sure of the exact amount, but if you combine the house, land, and various other things registered under my father's name, it should amount to quite a bit.
So how much will Nancy inherit?
Faced with Daniel's question, I mumbled and couldn't say anything. A strong intuition inside me was ringing alarm bells, telling me I couldn't reveal the truth here. Actually, the inheritance is supposed to be split entirely between Mom and Kelly, so there's nothing left for me. Hearing my answer, Daniel stood up, quickly went to his room, grabbed the divorce papers, and came back. He then thrust the divorce papers in front of me as if he had made a decision. He spoke, not bothering to hide his obvious disappointment.
I expected this. You've always been an uncomfortable presence for them. There's a perfect sister there, and it's only natural for you to be overshadowed by her. As for the inheritance, there's nothing left for you. What a situation. For me, there's no advantage in being with you, whether you are here or not. So, will you divorce me? To be honest, I've been in close contact with your sister recently, and frankly, you've been in the way.
In front of me was the divorce paper, already signed by Daniel. Without hesitation, I picked up the pen and wrote my name on it. As I watched Daniel quickly leave to submit it to the city hall, I suppressed a slight smile in my heart. I knew that his satisfied smile was the last one I would see. A delayed but certain retribution for my mother, sister, and all the people who had made my father and me suffer had just begun. The next day, a new morning came, and I spoke to the lawyer holding my father's will, arranging for him to accompany me to my parents' house. In the living room of my parents' house, when I presented the legally recognized authentic will to my mother and sister, their previously confident expressions changed instantly. They repeatedly read the words written on the document.
This can't be. There is a legal will here clearly stating that only Kelly and I are to inherit.
To that claim, the lawyer calmly responded.
Well then, to verify the authenticity of this will, let's proceed with a handwriting analysis. If this will turn out to be a deliberately created forgery, you'll be charged with fraud. Are you okay with that?
To this question, my mother couldn't find any words to counter and just fell silent. The lawyer then continued, pressing on with harsh truths.
I am well aware of the deceased's situation. Even after he required care, he was neglected, and his personal belongings were sold without permission. It seems your sister got caught up in nightlife and gambling, and as a result, she withdrew the money to pay off her debts from the deceased's personal savings. These cruel acts are why you all were deprived of any inheritance rights. If you continue to infringe upon Nancy's legal rights, we are prepared to take this to court. Are you prepared for that?
As the lawyer finished speaking, my mother and sister were like ghosts or empty shells, only able to sit there. I didn't miss this chance. I got hold of the savings account book that my father had hidden, made up my mind to leave, and decided that this was the final moment to break away from my family. Against Daniel's intentions, he married into the family without the topic of inheritance coming up, convinced by my mother and sister to start a married life with them for the sake of living expenses. Unaware of anything, he did not even imagine that my mother and sister actually didn't have any inheritance hidden away, and he took reckless actions toward the future, like buying an expensive car and quitting his job. His life was filled with luxury and a false sense of happiness, but it was all superficial. However, he eventually faced reality. Realizing that there was actually no inheritance, Daniel was dumbfounded. It was the moment when his true nature, craving for property, came to light. In a panic, he contacted me.
Nancy, I was wrong. I don't need anything else in my life but you. I want to start over.
But my response was calm and resolute. I don't need you anymore. Plus, you have a new wife now, don't you? Take care of Kelly. Leaving those words behind, I quietly hung up the phone. What I knew was that just before Daniel contacted me, I had also received a call from my sister. The call from Kelly, my sister, was full of anger and disappointment.
Because of this, my life has turned into a nightmare. As soon as Daniel married me, he quit his job and foolishly began to waste money. I never imagined I would end up with a man only interested in money. It feels like my family registry has been tainted. What are you going to do about it?
I remained calm without showing my emotions. On the other hand, I did not break my calm demeanor even in front of my angry sister, Kelly, who was openly expressing her emotions. It seems like you are also obsessed with money, Kelly. I think you and Daniel make a very compatible couple in terms of values. Well, it seems Daniel has been close to you since the time we were married. Now that your relationship has developed further, shouldn't we celebrate it? However, the affair is a different matter. I'll be demanding alimony soon for that. From now on, we'll only be in contact through lawyers. This is probably the last time I'll hear your voice. Surprised and puzzled, Kelly asked.
Are you really my sister?
Without losing my composure, I calmly responded. It was you and your family who didn't treat me as part of the family. After exchanging these words, I cut off the call with my sister, blocked her number, and decided to sever their connection forever. Now free, I used the inheritance I received from my father to buy a warm, new home and moved in. In my new job at the office, I started my new duties as an administrative assistant, and amidst my busy days, I savored the joys of living alone. Although I sometimes felt the loneliness of being alone, I had the priceless presence of my family, my late father serving as emotional support. Every time I left the house, I would always say, "I'll do my best today, Dad," to my father's portrait. And it seemed like my father in the photograph was softly smiling back at me, as if he wanted to say something. This had become my daily routine and her emotional support to start each new day.
I honestly don't see why you're needed by this company. With a frustrated expression on his face, Keith, my boss at the company where I work, told me this. Keith, if anything, is superfluous. He frequently uses phrases like "you make too many mistakes" or "you're slow at your job" to disparage subordinates he doesn't like. He fired me regardless of the veracity of these allegations. Never again reveal your face here. He threw a fit and declared that I was dismissed after I retaliated a little for his terrible behavior. When I heard that, I quietly walked out of the room. He would never have anticipated what transpired, but he was presumably pleased to get rid of a boisterous subordinate. George is my name. 3 years ago, after graduating from college, I, a 25-year-old man with a sweet addiction, started working for a confectionery firm. Our business began as a modest suburban family-run store, but it progressively expanded and became a corporation. Sales have been soaring ever since. We have opened a number of stores, mostly in the city. Given the expansion of the internet in recent years, blogs, and social media have probably had a significant influence. Since I was a young child, I have always liked sweets, especially cakes made in the Western style. Try the new recipe here. What are your thoughts? I loved baking cakes, in addition to enjoying eating them. After school, I would go straight to the kitchen, even before I finished my homework. I would occasionally create my own confections, and other times I would make pre-existing ones. George, don't you love baking so much? Yeah, give it a try. I would share my creations with my pals so they could sample it. I used to only make them because I enjoyed them, but at this point, I had a desire to use my candies to make people happy. Although my buddies served as my taste testers, I did felt a little terrible for them. He quickly took a portion of the tiny clear plastic packet I gave him and put it in his mouth. It tastes good. Every time I brought him candy, he seemed delighted. It seems that he also enjoyed sweets. It's been said that birds of a feather flock together, and even as a little child, I understood that to be true. However, it has a hint of sourness. Sour, huh? Perhaps I added too much sauce. The berry sauce was sandwiched between 2 layers of sponge cake. Maybe I used the wrong sauce, or maybe I used too much. I wrote down his comments in a little notepad so I could think about them later. I used it as a doodle book during school recess as well. It was an odd, simple notebook with notes about baking interspersed with drawings of robots and monsters. Aside from that, it tastes really good. Thank you. After making a fresh batch, I'll bring some more. After packing the notebook containing his comments into my bag, my companion and I hurried to the local park. I wasn't caged up indoors all the time just because I loved baking. Like any other child, I also liked to run about and play outside. In retrospect, I can say that my early years were enjoyable, creative, and energetic. My mom in particular was particularly concerned about my pastime, though. Are you baking again, George? Indeed, I developed a brand new recipe. As usual, I was in the kitchen preparing sweets one day after school when my mother struck up a conversation with me. Don't you think you and your friends should play outside more often? I'll take my friends to the park after I'm finished. When I responded to her query, I meant that she didn't need to worry. Nevertheless, she muttered, with a worried expression. It was easy to assume that she wasn't persuaded, but I continued working with my back to the wall because I was occupied. All right, but since you're a boy, you ought to play outside more. All right, so what is the connection between gender and baking? I wanted to bake, so I did. I refused to allow anyone to get in the way of it. Every time I answered this question, I did so in a way that was a little defiant. As I carried this mindset throughout high school, my mother finally stopped bringing it up. After witnessing my true enjoyment, she most likely come to terms with it, or perhaps she simply gave up. In any case, I was happy as long as I could continue baking the way I wanted to. George, how is your college coursework going? On a Saturday morning, I was scrubbing the dishes and baking some sweets when my dad came over and inquired. Well, everything is going fine. All right. Just make sure you complete your college education. I am aware that my father has always been stern and has insisted that I prioritize both my studies and athletics. He never once instructed me to stop baking, which made me think he could be the traditional, stubborn kind. In fact, there were moments when I thought he was suddenly on my side. I'd eventually completed my college education without needing to take a gap year or repeat a year. Here, I used my passion for baking to my advantage and was hired by the confectionery firm I currently work for. I started off working at one of the stores, but I was moved to the head office last summer, where I currently work in the accounting division. Hold on, this is weird. The figures don't add up. Since I'm the kind of person who works best on my feet, spending all day at a computer doing math is really difficult for me. I've only had time to bake on the weekends since I started this job. Another cause of stress for me has been the significant cutback in the amount of time I spend on my pastime. One more thing. I and everyone else in the accounting department are always stressed out by a certain someone. Hey George, there were errors in the document you created once more. Double check your work before you submit it, yelled Keith, my supervisor, just now. It's me who receives the reprimands for these errors. I'm sorry. Are you able to identify the errors? I'll check it over and submit it again. Keith responded to my question by saying, Come on. Don't go around asking people about it. Look for it on your own. You realize you're not a child. With his hands on his hips and a half smile of incredulity, he stated this. He could simply tell me if he knows there are errors, but he chooses not to. He likes this power play, of course. Even though he only ever smokes or stamps papers, he is always criticizing his coworkers for small errors. I apologize. By the end of the day, I will locate it. He gets upset if we disagree, so the accounting department coworkers keep quiet. Keith takes advantage of that to become even more controlling. Everyone now experiences chronic stress as a result of this destructive cycle. Errors, where might they be? I checked to be sure Keith was gone, then muttered to myself as I looked for the errors he had pointed out. He would have another tantrum if I didn't put down what I was doing and concentrate on this. In this setting, it had become our responsibility as subordinates to keep him happy, and that had become our main concern. We would be depressed if we didn't at least whisper grumbles to ourselves. The mood in the accounting department was at its worst as a result. Although the material appeared to be acceptable, Keith's approval stamp was clearly visible on the PDF he returned. Only because Keith himself had examined the material should the stamp have been present. Is that a typo? After giving it some thought, I proofread the document. Despite going over it multiple times, nothing appeared to be incorrect. Oh, we're at it once more. This was not the first time such an incident has occurred. He wouldn't say what the error was, and once it was found, there wouldn't be anything wrong to find. It was a situation that had happened several times previously. Keith was engaging in what was essentially falsification. Well, such a prickly fellow. I had a senior colleague look it over just to be sure, but once more, there were no errors. I returned it to Keith exactly as it was, with no modifications. He causes needless suffering to his subordinates in this way. He discloses trivial or even non-existent errors to his superiors and claims credit for fixing them. To put it another way, his work consists entirely on pointing fingers and fabricating accomplishments. Documents had recently been changed and portions of data erased. Some have attempted to obtain proof and inform the superiors about him, but they appeared hesitant out of concern for reprisals. I continued to work as hard as I could under such circumstances. Our accounting department, which was in charge of creating the financial reports, was in a panic as the shareholders' meeting drew near. Because of this, the environment was more tense than usual, and everyone's threshold for rage was considerably lower than it was for Keith, who was carefree. We won't make it again, I guess. In a few cases, the numbers simply didn't add up, regardless of how many times I recalculated. There was a $50,000 sum that could not be explained. If my memory serves me well, the project paperwork for this project bore the approval seals of both George and Keith. This meant that Keith and I were in charge of the project, but I hadn't really done anything of it. I found it odd because he usually assigned me all of the work, but I never imagined Keith was in charge of this project, right? I went over to Keith after printing out the materials I needed to explain. What are you looking for? He glared at me with an irritated expression. The figures don't add up, no matter how many times I recalculate. Additionally, we're discussing a substantial amount of $50,000. I'd assumed you would know something, but I even questioned my senior accounting department colleagues. Keith appeared to get my point as he quickly perused the stapled pages. He wrinkled his brows for a time, then tossed the papers back on the desk. I'm not sure whether you have time for this. Simply finish your assignment. In my mind, I quietly cursed him because I believed that was what he ought to be doing. However, we can't disregard a $50,000 mystery. Stop talking. It's either a calculating error or a misunderstanding on your part. He refused to look into it further and kept to that stance regardless of what I said. It's extremely suspicious when someone is thus obstinately obstructive. I said in a low voice, "All right, fine," and went back to my desk. I was aware that we were currently overworked, but because Keith was not going to take any action, I made the subtle decision to look into the situation myself. The possibility that Keith was embezzling money was becoming clear. I gathered the required paperwork once more and returned to his desk. "Are you persistent, Keith? This time, what is it?" As if to suggest, "Figure out why I'm here yourself." I handed him the paperwork in silence. "I informed you that you made a calculation error. Where is the error exactly? Please draw attention to it." My blunt inquiry caught Keith off guard, and he became increasingly agitated. On the other hand, I maintained my composure and kept answering firmly. Keith refused to acknowledge anything in spite of all of this proof. "Therefore, if you're saying that there's an error, kindly point it out to me. Or is this merely a charge?" "You little." His leg bounced uneasily, and he appeared annoyed. I guess he was growing tired of my asking the same questions over and over. "You're slow at your job, to start. That isn't pertinent at the moment, is it? You make too many errors. In particular, where are the errors? Point them out, please." I saw a drop of perspiration trickle down Keith's brow. He was speaking incoherently more and more. Even with the facts I had, it was a gamble, but it appeared that I was correct. To be honest, I fail to see why you are needed by this company. As he spoke, Keith swallowed his rage and attempted a bitter smile, but I simply replied, "What a coincidence. I have the same sentiments. I also fail to see why the organization needs you." "You little, what did you say?" At what I said, Keith erupted in anger. His smirk soon gave way to a look of rage as he yelled so loudly that his voice could be heard throughout the workplace. "You've been fired. Never again reveal your face here." The abrupt announcement of my termination caught me off guard. He went farther than I thought he would. He continued to spit forth a barrage of insults while I stood there wide-eyed, even in his rage. Keith had gone absolutely crazy and was now a ferocious beast. I left the workplace after apologizing to my senior colleagues for my inability to defuse the situation. I pulled out my phone and called someone as I was walking down the corridor. "Hey, I want you to proceed with that issue we talked about earlier." The other end's voice was one of satisfaction. "Yes, that's all. Thank you." After hanging up, I returned it to my pocket. I couldn't help but smile as I stood in the dark corridor. As planned, the shareholders' meeting took place a few days later. I hadn't shown up in the accounting department since I was fired, but it appeared that the preparations were finished on schedule. I surprisingly ran into Keith as I walked inside the melancholy location. "Oh, hi there. You're here, but why? This isn't where you belong. What brought you here? Go now." As soon as he saw me, he began insulting me, but today I didn't bother to answer. I simply laughed casually and dismissed him. "Keith, you're speaking too loudly." There stood a tall, graying-haired man. Scott was returning today after spending the last few weeks in the hospital for medical testing. He was the department head and my boss, as well as Keith's. "You're right." I said, "I was fired. Scott, I already fired this guy." "Keep quiet," I said. Scott interrupted Keith, who flinched back, his expression sad. But he kept glaring at me, so it was obvious he still didn't like that I was here. "It's almost time now. Should we leave?" "Yes," I said, and Scott and I made our way to the best seats in the house, which were set aside for the executives and significant stockholders. "Why are you sitting there, George? Are you even aware of who owns the seat?" Keith continued to yell after being repeatedly warned to stop. "Keith, don't you know?" The introductory remarks began as Scott, apparently impatient, proceeded to explain. Scott paused his speech and looked at the presenter. I did as he said. At last, even Keith sat down and grudgingly took a seat. Mr. Kelly, the president, stepped up to the stage and started discussing the company's current state, management, and future goals. I could feel Keith's eyes on me all the time during the process. He appeared to have turned pallid. The reports end there. The question and answer period will now begin. Please raise your hand if you have any queries. No hands were raised. The stockholders were too busy going over their materials. Yet, this is my chance. Excuse me, may I ask a question? I raised my hand and looked straight at Mr. Kelly, having previously prepared my questions. I caught a glimpse of Keith squirming out of the corner of my eye. Go ahead. I'm grateful. Concerning the financial statements of the business. Here, I went forward and gave Mr. Kelly the materials. These were the resources I had gathered while looking into Keith. According to this document, there appeared to be approximately $50,000 in unaccounted for expenses. Could you elaborate on the purpose of this money? I appreciate your inquiry. Mr. Kelly turned to Keith and said, I will have Keith, the head of the accounting department, respond to this. Keith jumped to his feet, shaky, and yelled, Why is someone who was dismissed asking questions like this? Furthermore, why are you seated there at all? Keith was making a spectacle rather than responding to the question, possibly because his wrongdoing had been revealed at the shareholders' meeting. A person with your level of incompetence has no place here. You don't belong here. I told you to go. Like that day, Keith had lost all self-control. Normally polite, Scott loudly stepped in to stop him. Keith remained still for a single word, possibly taken aback by his customary manner. It is quite reasonable for him to be present at the shareholders' meeting on this side, no less. Nothing is wrong with it. Keith's expression became blank in bewilderment as he listened to Scott's statements. He fidgeted awkwardly with shame, as if he had regained some of his composure. Keith, take a look at this. Having said that, I produced a copy of a document, a proxy statement, to Keith. When Keith understood what it meant, he started to shake once more. He must have realized who he had betrayed and the consequences. According to the proxy statement, his older brother owns over 60% of the shares, making him the primary shareholder. On his behalf, he is attending. Yes, this was a very unpleasant truth for Keith, and he fell back in his chair when he heard it. He uttered only barely audible moans, as if unable to speak. This company's president is my father, Richard Kelly. Earlier, he was the one on stage telling the stockholders what was going on. My father assumed control after my grandfather, the founder, passed away. The biggest stockholder, my older brother Samuel, is employed in a totally unrelated field to confectionery. What I'm going to inherit is the cake shop. My brother was a senior in high school while I was in second grade. My father started talking to him about the future about the time he was accepted to college. Yes, it's still a long way off, but I'd like to entrust it to you as the eldest son. My brother, obviously distressed by my father's severe tone, scratched the back of his head. Playing loudly with a dual-screen square handheld game console next to them, I was just 8 years old at the time and didn't understand the scenario. Dad, you know I'm not really a fan of cakes, right? My brother had less of a sweet tooth, which was a sharp contrast to my love of baking and sweets. In hindsight, expecting him to take over a bakery shop seemed rather harsh. Yes, your mother informed me. Then spare me, please. I won't be able to dedicate myself to running a store that sells something I dislike. Yes, it is accurate. However, the store was still a little family-owned enterprise at the time. Sales, however, were rising steadily. Making tasty and reasonably priced candies that even young children could purchase with their pocket money was the shop's credo. This strategy had been sufficiently well-liked locally to be highlighted in local publications. My brother made the decision to invest in the store and form it as a corporation when I was a high school student. He decided to do that rather than take over the company. Sales of the pastries have increased even further since then. Our current position is the result of the company's steady growth. Hey, my brother is expecting his second child soon and can't leave his wife's side, which is why I'm here on his behalf. Keith's face paled even more when I told him why I was there. He remained sitting and gestured at me with a quivering finger. But the most significant one is your brother. It doesn't alter the fact that the business doesn't need you. What are you saying, Keith? Once again losing his temper, Keith received a stern reprimand from Scott. Keith's countenance, which I had seen on numerous occasions, became blank. He's the second son of Mr. Kelly and the next president of this company. What? It was unavoidable, yet it had become an unexpected announcement. As Scott said, it's still some time away, but I am set to take over from my father as president. The announcement that I would be taking over as vice president was meant to be made during the shareholders' meeting, but things have gone awry. Not at all. You, the incoming president? Keith appeared to lose focus as he heard Scott's statements. He didn't want to believe it, or rather, he couldn't believe it. How could he simply accept that the president's son was the subordinate he had worked so hard to discredit? In contrast to my brother, who disliked sweets, I enjoyed creating and eating them. I grew up eating cakes from the shop, so I was well aware of how good they were. My goal was for this taste to become even more popular nationwide. That's how I started thinking at one point. In order to produce sweets that could be purchased with pocket money, I not only manufactured pre-made cakes, but also developed my own recipes. I concentrated on cutting expenses as much as I could. How to make them appear as nice as they tasted was the difficult part. Beyond appearances, creating new creations brought me a lot of satisfaction. The procedure seemed almost like a puzzle game when these two guidelines were kept in mind. In addition to cutting expenses, I also wanted to make sure the ingredients were safe. It was difficult to source ingredients at a low cost while maintaining excellent quality, but we were able to do so because of our established connections with nearby farms and the new alliances we formed. The company grew as a result of these efforts. For me, it was crucial to value this business, which had developed from the cake shop my grandpa had started. I wanted to closely monitor the money flow because of this. Since I was already slated to become vice president, I was in the accounting division. I believe it was the right decision even if my original goal was different because I ended up exposing someone like Keith. We will now go on to the Q&A. The results of the study into this issue will be presented by George, the vice president. The shareholders' meeting continued after my father's remarks. Yes, Keith embezzled the $50,000 that couldn't be explained, I declared. The room was alive with sound as I spoke. The man at the heart of the dispute, Keith, remained hunched over in silence. He conspired to fabricate invoices with a supplier. Company funds were used to pay these invoices, and the supplier received a portion of the earnings. When we carefully examined the invoices, we discovered that Keith's approval stamp appeared on bills for goods that were never delivered. The supplier's representative acknowledged the misconduct when questioned. In order to prevent Keith and the other persons involved from escaping, my father and I agreed to report the damage to the police on the company's behalf. In front of the board members and shareholders, I revealed Keith's wrongdoing. With a dejected expression, he fell to his knees as everything became clear. I heard, "This is the police," at that very moment. "Keith, you have an arrest warrant." Keith was taken away by the police officers who had come at the shareholders' meeting. He allowed himself to be led away without protest. My father and I bowed to the stockholders a few minutes after the room had subsided. We were expressing regret for an employee's misbehavior. To formally look into the degree of the damages, we plan to collaborate closely with the police. The goal is to get Keith to pay back as much of the losses as he can, even though not all of them may be recouped. George was the first to discover the scam. I think he is qualified to lead this organization as vice president and then president because of his unwavering commitment to enforcing the law. The room erupted in cheers when Mr. Kelly said this. Being accepted instead of disliked was comforting. Let's listen to the new vice president's speech now. Although I did approach the microphone, however, I didn't feel anxious. Giving a speech didn't feel all that frightening, maybe because I had been much more nervous dealing with Keith. My grandfather started this business as a cake shop. It was soon after the war, when food was in low supply and the wounds of the conflict were still evident. My grandfather started baking sweet cakes to lift the spirits of the kids when he noticed their grins waning. He gained experience and expertise in cake decorating as the number of kids visiting for goodies steadily grew. It all began when he used his skills to open a tiny stall. My father, the current president, inherited my grandfather's wish to preserve the children's smiles with cakes, and I now wish to continue that tradition with him. The environment surrounding children and the need for sweets have undergone tremendous shift during the post-war era. The state of the economy has changed and patterns have emerged. However, there is one thing that hasn't changed. Children's smiles when they eat sweets. I want to make sure that priceless joy never fades. I need the help of all of our workers and shareholders to do this. The crowd erupted in cheers once more as I bowed and concluded my remarks. My father gave me a really emotional look and said, "George, you've grown up so well." I then quit the accounting division and started working mostly as my father's assistant at meetings, on business travels, and when he wanted to greet people. Busy days continued, with a lot of running around. Despite everything, I always made sure to monitor the company's internal operations. I was often in the product development division. This feels less like work and more like a continuation of my previous pastime. It tastes good, but maybe a little too sour. I eventually moved to the side of judging other people's cakes. Children may find it unpleasant if the sourness is too intense. Although I appreciate the request, I do feel a little alone. Even asking my dad if I can work in the development department more often is something I'm considering. This size could present a choking hazard. Could you perhaps add some holes or make it smaller? I was concerned that my incessant criticism could irritate people, but the development department staff assured me that it was beneficial. I've known a few people in this department since I was a young child. Fortunately, everyone trusted my opinions, maybe because I've been eating the company's pastries since I was a child. Are you only here to taste the cakes, George? I was mocked by Edward, the development department director, who has known me since I was a young child. Obviously not. I'm here to observe the progress of the development project. Everything is fine. Additionally, your exact counsel is always quite beneficial. Knowing that I wasn't merely circling about was a relief. I used to work in the accounting department, and I occasionally showed my face there as well. The department head is now one of my seniors who always looked out for me. Under Scott's tutelage, he appears to be settling into his new role. He'll likely succeed even in this new managerial role because he's good at taking care of others. Oh, Mr. Kelly, good afternoon. Good afternoon, indeed. The accounting section has a more upbeat vibe than it did previously. It's most likely because the problematic person who threw tantrums, made up mistakes, and tossed work on others is no longer there. Since then, working has been considerably simpler. Above all, we don't get yelled at, and we can communicate with our managers more readily. The office erupted in laughter when one of the coworkers mentioned that. Yes, it's a positive result if they can now laugh about what happened in the past. Sincerely, I'm relieved they weren't traumatized. I was happy that I hadn't made a bad choice. During a break on another day, I decided to stop by one of our stores. Originally a tiny cabin that my grandfather constructed by hand, this was our first store and has undergone multiple renovations. Hello. A bell rang and a parent and child stepped through the manual door. A young child, perhaps 4 or 5 years old, appeared to be thrilled by the pastries. More customers soon arrived. As the kids selected which cakes to purchase, they were all grinning broadly. Some of them filled their small baskets with so many cakes that they appeared to be about to overflow. Although it was wonderful to watch, I questioned whether their mothers would discipline them for grabbing so many. Funny, this reminds me of the past. We can purchase as many cakes as we choose now that we are grown-ups. They refer to that as a shopping binge. The exhilaration of being asked to choose only one favorite dessert, whether it was the same cake I always had or the risk of trying something else, was what I enjoyed most though. I was the kind of person who was always up for trying something new. Finding different kinds of cakes was like embarking on a true journey. The children who are currently selecting cakes in the supermarket are undoubtedly experiencing the same thrill. There are a lot of smiles here because of this. It's time to return to work and give it my all then. My goal is to preserve those smiles and pass them on to the following generation. Keeping that in mind, I started working on my next assignment. You poor high school dropout, get out. You have no place here in this elite, members-only opulence. This yell reverberated through the corridors, completely out of place. The voice belonged to a hot-tempered, attractive woman who had been a beloved classmate since middle school. She had come without invitation, and as soon as she saw me, she began to abuse me. The gathering's atmosphere was soured when she protested that the organizers had completely failed to invite her, even when one of them attempted to step in. Despite not receiving an invitation herself, it appears that she learned about this place from our classmates' social media posts. She was compulsively browsing the social media accounts of yet another old classmate with whom she had little or no relationship. A number of students who shared the material appeared to have regrets. They had no idea that a student they didn't even follow or have a close relationship with would take the time to read their posts. Additionally, none of the classmates who posted had made it clear whose reunion they were referring about. Did you want to attend the high school reunion, the middle school reunion, or the elementary school reunion? She did, however, find the classmates who posted and discovered that they were all from our middle school years. The other classmates in attendance were extremely surprised when she boasted about it. To be honest, her level of obsession was terrifying. Since she is hated, Emily was not invited to the reunion. Despite this, she seems to still think she is popular, as she did in middle school, and she complained to the organizer that the reunion couldn't begin without her, the class star. She gave a triumphant snort when the organizer apologized for not inviting her. She then began to torment me once again after realizing I was still there. She was very annoying with her loud and annoying ranting. Ultimately, the disturbance was an annoyance and was clearly causing discomfort for the other students. I inquired as to whether I should actually go. I chose to depart after she said that my presence was in fact an annoyance. I told my pupils not to worry about me and opened the door to go when they tried to stop me. She exclaimed that she was relieved as I was leaving, as if I could hear her. She had no idea what a horrible experience the following morning would bring. I'm Jack, and I'm 34. I'll be 35 in a few months. My parents, grandparents, and I are a family of 4. I was recently kicked out of a secret area of a posh traditional inn that was only open by reference. For our reunion, basically a get-together of our middle school classmates. This inn was booked out. Whether they were class or age group reunions, we have always referred to these kinds of events as simply reunions. Emily, a classmate from middle school, was the one who drove me out of the reunion site and treated me like a pauper. Emily was seen negatively by her peers when she began showing off her position as a president's daughter in middle school. We all knew as classmates that her father's business was too little to justify such behavior. She was, in fact, the daughter of a president, but that didn't make her superior to other people. Emily constantly pretended to be better than everyone else, but she particularly denigrated me and called me poor, presumably because I didn't express my feelings much, which Emily didn't find funny. I didn't reply to Emily's remarks or cry like other of my classmates did. Instead, I chose to ignore them. Despite my frustration, I kept it to myself. I thought it was useless to respond. I believe I know why Emily thought I was impoverished. She may have assumed we were a single-parent household because I was living with my mother at the time. Emily thought I was impoverished because, to her, a single-parent household equated to poverty. With such biased views, it seemed futile to dispute with someone like Emily. We weren't a single-parent household at the time, even though I was living alone with my mother. Since my father didn't live with us, it might appear that we were raised by a single parent, but he did provide for our financial needs. My father is a Japanese-American international lawyer who holds legal degrees from California and Japan. He was employed in the California office of a major law business that has offices all over the world. He was moved to Japan, nevertheless, while I was in the 4th grade of primary school. My mother and I thought about following him to Japan at the time, but we decided against it for a reason. Even after 10 years of marriage, my father had not been accepted by my mother's parents or my grandparents. My mother and I made the decision to remain in California in order to persuade them. Despite their disapproval of my father, my grandparents were always loving toward me. My father would come visit us once or twice a year for a lengthy vacation, but my mother and I stayed in California since it seemed she didn't want to take away my devoted grandparents. My mother got married just after graduating from college, which is presumably why my grandparents were against it. My mother had just begun her profession, but my father was 6 years older and had more life experience. My father told me that my mother had chased him with passion, but my grandparents may have thought that my father had enchanted their daughter. Even though he was of American blood and spoke English fluently, my grandparents also found it difficult to understand that he was not truly American. Though they had not emotionally reconciled it, they could comprehend it conceptually. In an effort to convince them, my mother and I would frequently visit my grandparents and assist with the family company. I started to believe that I wanted to work in my grandparents' field someday while I was assisting them with their company. In the summer of my 3rd year of middle school, I made this request. Maybe someday I can take over here. My mother and grandmother were taken aback by what I said. Their astonishment was understandable because I looked up to my father and had said when I was younger that I wanted to practice law like him. My mother and grandparents likely believed that I still wanted to be a lawyer, even though it's common for childhood goals to shift. Everything changed after this realization. My mother had married my father, and I was going to be a lawyer, so apparently my grandparents had been concerned about not having an heir. My father would have abandoned his career as a lawyer to work with my mother if she had made it clear that she would take charge. Even as his kid, I could see how much my father loved my mother. His displays of affection were so numerous that I was ashamed to observe them. Naturally, he lavished me with love as well. Perhaps my father's too direct displays of devotion were the reason I was reluctant to show my feelings. My father began discussing resigning from his position and returning to America when I showed interest in taking over my grandparents' company. He had fulfilled his aim of becoming a lawyer, so I felt it was a waste, but he didn't want to live apart from my mother and me. My grandfather remarked, "Jack can take over when he's an adult," and proposed that I move in with my father in Japan, although my mother and I were concerned about this. My grandmother agreed, stating that it was odd that the family had to live apart for such a long time. It was planned that I would travel to Japan as soon as I finished middle school because, in effect, they had accepted my father. Following that, everything was hectic, including getting a visa, getting ready to move, choosing schools, and more. There was a lot to accomplish. I eventually attended high school and college in Japan before coming back to the United States at the age of 22 to begin getting ready to take over my grandparents' company. My father promised to resign his work and accompany me back to America once it was decided that I would. However, my mother convinced him to stay in Japan because she wanted to. In order to keep my father from leaving his ideal work, my mother may have insisted on staying in Japan even if she didn't really want to. I moved home with my grandparents in order to get ready to take over the family business. My grandparents were generally kind, but when it came to labor, they were strict. They would ruthlessly reprimand me if I even slightly neglected my duties. After a while of rigorous supervision as a successor, my grandfather unexpectedly became ill. Even though he was still employed, his body must have reached its limit at the age of 74. At the age of 71, my grandma also made the decision to retire. Workers who had worked for my grandparents for a longer period of time than I had, and who had been involved since they were young, acknowledged me as the heir and concurred that I should assume the role. Even if there were still some questions, I made the decision to go under my grandparents' direction. I intended to include the suggestions of the younger staff members while maintaining the elements that my grandparents valued. I had been in charge for 5 years, and it was time to launch new projects. I was living a very hectic life as a result of this. My parents would occasionally come from Japan to assist. My father and my grandparents get along well now. Now, it's normal for my grandparents to give him hugs. I got a call from Michael, a good friend and classmate from middle school, as we were getting ready to begin putting these new efforts into action. Michael's call must have been about something important because he knew I was busy. I was shocked to see our old classmate Sarah there with Michael when I got to the meeting spot. After hearing their narrative, I realized why they got together. "We've decided to get married," they declared. I had assumed Michael would be by alone. In middle school, Michael and Sarah were my classmates, but they had not dated since. They attended different high schools and universities, as I recall. It came out that Sarah, who was motivated to become a nurse by the illness of her loving grandmother, was working at the hospital where Michael was admitted after overworking himself and becoming ill. Everyone was aware that since middle school, after her grandma passed away, Sarah had dreamed of becoming a nurse. Sarah had attended a high school with a nursing program, I recalled. She had been admired by many boys, drawn to her gentle and serene disposition. Michael was now an attorney. I had known Michael since we were kids, and since our homes were next to one another, I was also aware of his lawyer father. Michael shared my desire to follow in my father's footsteps and become a lawyer. Michael had achieved his aim of becoming a lawyer, but I had taken a different route. He was a perfect choice for the position because of his strong sense of justice, and he frequently served as our class's mediator. The news that Sarah, the class's Madonna, and Michael, who was renowned for having a strong sense of justice, were getting married was noteworthy. I wanted to know how our peers would respond. Michael wanted to inform me in person, but they intended to announce their marriage on the class group chat. Michael's remark moved me, and I felt both embarrassed and happy at the same moment. It seemed different coming from a close friend, even though I had received overt displays of love from my family. I said, "Why don't we organize a reunion?" in an attempt to gain Michael's affection. One of the most important events in our class was the marriage of Michael and Sarah. I thought it was a little dull to announce their marriage via a group chat, but I also wanted to see how our classmates would respond. But my idea caused Michael and Sarah to seem conflicted. I recalled that 5 years prior, I had not received the invitation to the 15-year reunion, which was conducted every 5 years. Michael and Sarah looked at each other and then explained what had happened when I inquired. Only my close classmates knew that I had moved to Japan after middle school. Emily wouldn't know, of course. When Emily discovered that someone else was residing in my former home, and that there was no indication that I was enrolled in a local high school, it seems that she formed rash assumptions. She had been spreading untrue rumors among her classmates, saying that I couldn't afford high school and was working at a construction site, or that I had flooded into poverty in the middle of the night. Naturally, Emily's lies were refuted by my friends who were aware that I had relocated to Japan, and as a result, no one now believes her. But as a result of these falsehoods, Emily gained even more resentment and was kicked out of a group chat that was made without her. The group chat with Emily is barely working right now. The truth is that, even though Emily was a classmate, she never replied to invitations for the 5th and 10th year reunions. On the day of both reunions, though, she turned up and made the absurd statement, "It's dull without me," without even paying the participation fee. This sparked conversations about stopping the reunions if it meant inviting Emily. I was in Japan for the 5th reunion, so I was unable to attend, and I was too busy learning the ropes at work to attend the 10th. Only close friends have been getting together ever since, almost like little reunions. When it came to throwing a reunion, Michael and Sarah were apprehensive that Emily's presence might ruin the fun. Even though I could disregard Emily's provocations, I didn't want to think about her destroying the atmosphere of the reunion. I therefore proposed that we ask everyone in the class group chat that was made without Emily. Since there was a chat group with no Emily, I had expected that everyone would agree not to invite her. However, I was surprised by the support for inviting her to be 0. That not a single person, not even Sarah or Michael, suggested inviting her astonished me. Even if they didn't like her, several others expressed that they wouldn't go if Emily was present. Emily had apparently been verbally abusing and demeaning her peers in both high school and college. Soon, classmates who had been her victims began to complain in the discussion. Michael changed the subject by offering himself and Sarah as organizers in a reply. As a result, the topic of conversation changed from disparaging Emily to organizing the reunion. It's typical of Michael, who was driven by justice. It's not exactly enjoyable to see a conversation full of insults. Former classmates started to arrive at the location one by one on the day of the reunion. This time, the reunion took place in a special, rented area of a posh hotel reserved for members only, where admission is required with an invitation. As the start time drew near, I was thrilled to see how enthralled everyone was with the location. For the introductory remarks, Michael and Sarah took the microphone. "We're getting married," Michael then declared, his face heated. After a brief period of silence, congratulations began to pour in from all sides, and a joyous spirit quickly filled the room. Before long, Michael and Sarah were encircled by people who were asking them a lot of questions. I started crying as I watched them hesitantly respond. Even though I struggled to express my feelings, happy tears seemed to come easily. Perhaps as I've become older, I've started to resemble my father, who expresses his feelings freely. It made me smile to think that my father would be publicly crying and expressing his happiness at such a time. We experienced a surge of nostalgia as we reflected on our middle school years. Our class was known for being close-knit, even with Emily. Seniors in our club events even questioned some of us about how we got to be so close. There were also individuals who heard from pals in other courses that we were almost strangely close. Our homeroom teacher had previously voiced concern that our tight relationships would cause us to become distracted from our exam preparation. It appears that our bond hasn't changed in 20 years. After a brief period of excitement due to Michael and Sarah's unexpected marriage announcement, the venue calmed down as everyone started to share their most recent news. Abruptly, a ruckus broke out next to the corridor that connected the annex to the main building. An employee was attempting to stop someone, as I could see. As the voices became louder, most of the spectators began to notice, not just me standing close to the entrance. Then Emily appeared from the doorway, where everyone's attention was now fixed. "How dare you not invite me?" Emily said as she rushed through the sliding doors as everyone's eyes were fixed on the entry. Her misdirected yells reverberated throughout the private members-only room. I sighed in shock that Emily, who was beyond 30, was still acting selfishly. She turned when she saw me close to the entrance and yelled, "The poor person and high school dropout should just leave. You don't belong here." Although Emily had always had a lovely face, her nasty demeanor was now clearly visible. Since I've been concerned by her since the beginning, I apologize for thinking this way, even though I know I shouldn't judge individuals by their outward appearance. She was insulting me even though I had invited her. "This is an open house. It's not a reunion," I informed her. Since this event was formerly an open house, the sign at the entrance at the conclusion also read, "Open House." I suggested this concept to Michael and Sarah after we decided not to invite her in the group chat. They were worried about not admitting anyone because of their strong sense of justice and kindness. The excuse that it was merely a coincidence that the invitees were old acquaintances was offered by a lavish open house for the recently constructed NX. Sarah and Michael, who most likely didn't want to deal with her anyway, immediately agreed when they heard my offer. Initially taken aback, Emily then started to vent after discovering that everyone present was a classmate, indicating that this was clearly a reunion. "You're disqualified as an organizer for forgetting to invite me," Emily said to Sarah as she came forward as the chaos increased. Emily proudly described how she found out about this reunion before launching into a tirade against Sarah. It appears that she obtained this information by searching through the social media accounts of former classmates with whom she had no communication. Classmates who commented about the reunion were contrite. They most likely never thought Emily would review their accounts so thoroughly. None of the classmates who blogged about the reunion had said which one it was. Was it the high school reunion, the middle school reunion, or the elementary school one? However, Emily painstakingly went through the posts made by her old classmates and found that they were all from her middle school years. It was really terrifying how obsessed she was with going to such extremes. Not only did I feel this way, but there were whispers of fear among the guests. She went on to say that she was skilled at obtaining information because of her work as an influencer. However, as was said in the previous group discussion, she hardly had 100 SNS followers. She essentially pretended to be an influencer without realizing how unpopular she was. "The party doesn't start without popular me," she demanded, and she went up to Sarah. Emily gave Sarah a victorious grin as she apologized. She started to bother me once again after noticing me, with the potential to disrupt the class and cause discomfort for her peers. Her loud tirades were nothing short of a nuisance. I'd had enough. "If you're going to say that, should I just leave?" I questioned her. She maintained that having me around was more of a bother. "All right then, I'll leave the rest to you." My students attempted to stop me as I declared my desire to exit the place. "Isn't it ridiculous to hold back a dropout, a guy like him?" Emily exclaimed, smiling as she saw this. I reassured my classmates, urged them to have fun, and went outdoors. Emily's voice trailed after me, expressing relief at my leaving. It struck me as ironic, given the problems she would have the next day. After everyone had paid their fees, Emily's loud voice reverberated in the foyer the following morning. "What's with this amount?" cried Emily, the final person to pay, as she saw the bill. She was stunned when she saw the $225,000 bill. It was an amount she couldn't afford as a self-described influencer. Sarah went over to the workers and accused them of fraud and extortion. "You promised to take responsibility yesterday, didn't you?" After the reunion concluded last night, I departed for Michael and found out what had transpired. Emily persisted in her scathing remarks about her students even after I had left. She started behaving too familiar with Michael after learning that he was a lawyer. Emily identified herself as an influencer without a job. Michael made it clear that he preferred independent people, but Emily assumed he was referring to her. Michael was about to say anything when Sarah announced that he was her fiancé, but he was carried away alone, believing she wouldn't understand unless he explained it. But Sarah was humiliated by Emily, who called her ugly and uninteresting. Then she abruptly said she had no interest in Michael, even though she had been smitten with him only seconds before. Even I was stunned when I later learned about it. I didn't understand how someone could be so brash after aggressively flirting with someone and then brushing them off, whether it was pride or something else. The pupils who stayed at the scene were undoubtedly as shocked and gaping. After some time, the reunion had to end because of Emily's actions. No one disagreed with Emily's insistence that it was too early to call it quits. After witnessing Emily's continuous attempts to get the guys to continue drinking, Michael made the decision to sign and let the staff know that it was done. Emily was about to leave the venue when Sarah, with great reluctance, said, You'll have to take responsibility for driving Jack away." She smiled as she said it. When Michael told me this, he appeared somewhat alarmed, as though he could already picture the day when he would be totally controlled by Sarah. I couldn't contain my laughter. Emily became quite perplexed by Sarah's comment and began making a commotion, asking that the front desk manager take accountability. Knowing this would occur, Emily was clearly disgusted when I arrived and exclaimed, "Are you still here, you wretched thing? Simply vanish." She was shocked when I said, "Didn't you call me here? Actually, I am currently operating this historic inn that I inherited from my grandparents. Since last year, a new project plan has included the construction of the inn that would host the reunion. Being a traditional inn is no longer enough to draw guests in this day and age. We therefore intend to make the inn accessible to walk-in guests as well. In the future, we might rent it out for corporate retreats and weddings." As a monitor, I had asked the reunion attendees to complete surveys so I could use their input to inform future preparations. As a close friend, I wanted to provide a suitable setting for Michael's marriage announcement. But if Michael had known the true cause, I knew he would have hesitated. I invited everyone under the pretense of a viewing party because of this. I explained everything, but Emily was unconvinced that a poor dropout could manage a posh inn. Michael then added, "I think Jack's family is probably richer than Emily, but it might be strange for me to talk about someone else's family." He clarified that my father was an international lawyer and that this was the inn where my mother's family lived. Emily ceased referring to me as impoverished, but she offered justifications, stating that she refused to accept cash. But last night, I had made it very obvious to her that it was a viewing party. Because her classmates were present, she was the one who thought it was a reunion. Emily maintained, however, that the sum was outrageous. There was nothing I could do but break out the amount in detail. Participants in the viewing party paid $200 to act as monitors. One requirement was that participants complete a survey. I, the owner, wanted to see how the participants truly responded. Thus, that was part of the goal. However, I was unable to observe their responses because Emily pushed me out, so I chose to bill Emily the difference for the 25 participants. I utilized the main building's pricing of $1,200 per person, less the $200 charge, which came to $1,000 per person for 25 guests, because the inn's room rates weren't finalized yet. Emily was receiving what she was due, despite her claims that she was unable to pay such a sum. Michael informed her that she was fortunate not to be held accountable for the harm she had done to the viewing party. Participants were required to complete a survey, but Emily suggested an installment plan that would only cost $100 a month. That sum is out of proportion. It was an absurd plan that would take years to pay off $25,000. Someone I had contacted showed up at that very moment. Emily's face went white as she saw this individual, and she froze. Anticipating Emily's incapacity to pay, I had contacted her father first thing in the morning. I had Emily's father's contact information because he has a towel rental business and had been to this inn on several business trips. I had rejected his proposals, assuming he was being offered a contract, because we do our own laundry and sanitation, and had no plans to employ a rental service. After I'd explained the issue, Emily's father quickly arrived but was forced to apologize with his daughter. He apologized and begged for mercy, pointing to the dire financial state of his company. I had the almost admiring notion, like father, like daughter. Forgiving them now would, in a sense, only encourage Emily to go on additional outbursts. She showed no regret and had the audacity to say, "I'll marry you," even in such a circumstance. Emily started crying as I suggested contacting our legal counsel. When Michael noticed this, he told Emily's father, who was sitting there in disbelief, to remove the sobbing Emily from the front area right once to prevent any disruption to the inn's operations. After that, Emily's father quickly took her arm and ushered her outside. In the hotel business, Emily's father's towel rental business wasn't well known for providing towels with mold or stains that couldn't be cleaned. I had heard that the company was losing contracts quickly as a result of the careless service. Additionally, I was informed that Emily's father attempted to make ridiculous demands, such as requesting contracts in return for marrying off his lovely daughter. Emily was really lovely, even when she was silent. Rumor had it that someone who had accepted a blind date after being enchanted by her pictures was totally repulsed by her demeanor. Emily must have pushed her way into the reunion in search of a new source to suck from after finding out that her father's business was going bankrupt. Regretfully, none of her classmates who were aware of her personality expressed interest in dating her in the future. Michael was in charge of alerting Emily and her father's business about the financial obligations associated with this tragedy. At the past 2 years, Michael has worked at the inn as a legal advisor. My folks came back to America 2 years ago. Michael, who had always respected my father, made the decision to quit his office job and pursue his studies under my father's tutelage at that time. Michael's enthusiasm convinced my father, who had planned to retire after returning to America, to start his own legal practice. Michael manages the majority of the operations, although my father serves as the representative. Until he is prepared to lead alone, it is agreed that Michael will take over the company with my father's assistance. Michael will soon take over as head of the inn as my father now spends most of his time there. My parents ended up paying Emily's payment because she was unable to do so. However, her father's business went bankrupt as a result of the chaos she created at the inn's front desk. Emily's mother left the family because she was tired of her husband lavishing attention on their rebellious daughter. After working several jobs, Emily and her father moved into a little apartment. Personally, I'm still putting in a lot of effort at the inn. I live contentedly with my mom and grandma, although my grandfather went away last year. I've been arranging the new inn's opening since last year, and it's finally happening. Sarah and Michael will be the first visitors. Sarah and Michael made the decision to employ the inn's wedding package. In return for using their wedding for future advertising, we promised to provide it to them at a reduced price. I would have been pleased to provide it at a reduced price, even if there had been no advertising arrangement. But knowing Michael and Sarah, they would have insisted on paying the standard price. We decided on the modeling as Michael, our legal advisor, is aware of the standard fees and I couldn't fool him. Observing their joyous occasions inspires me to get married as well, albeit I have no specific partner in mind. How about Emily? Not at all. One thing that is completely impossible is that. The boss's daughter harassed me when I rejected her advances, eventually saying, "Useless employees get $1,000 a month tops." The manager told me not to take my decision to quit and join a competitor seriously after I sent in my resignation. Return here immediately. Can you afford to pay me $10 million a year? I asked him. I work for the corporation as W. Moore, and I'm 30 years old. I joined this organization 8 years ago after graduating from college. A product I created 3 years ago proved popular, and the business expanded quickly. Despite my busy schedule as the head of the development department, I like my life. I've gathered the supplies, Will. Would you kindly check them? Robert, my subordinate, gives me a hefty file. Despite his eccentricities, he is a driven individual. Many thanks. You know what, Will? Thus, Robert's rumors begin to circulate once more. What about the boss's daughter? For some reason, Robert was whispering that he had recently joined the company, even though everyone would soon find out. Yes, I am aware. She started working in HR, correct? You're correct. HR must be struggling to deal with the boss's daughter. Maybe, but I doubt she'll bring personal matters into work. You never know, though. It might occur if the boss's daughter is involved. Frequently, President Jones boasted about his daughter. He gained notoriety for displaying her photo to staff members who came into his office. He will, however, undoubtedly maintain his personal and professional lives apart now that she has joined the company. It is unjust to pass judgment on her before she has even begun. Let's maintain our neutrality. By the way, thanks for the stuff. In an attempt to stop Robert from gossiping, I said this. That's when it occurred. A tall woman with long hair entered the room with President Jones. That was the same face I recognized from the picture on the president's desk. When the president said, "Excuse me," every employee got to their feet and said, "Good afternoon, sir. I apologize for disturbing your work. I would want to present my daughter. Say hello, Susan, please. My name is Susan Jones. I'll be working in the Human Resources Department as of today. Since I'm the boss's daughter, please don't treat me any differently. I want to be treated normally by everyone. Good to meet everyone." Despite the fact that she is a working adult, her father was following her about for her introduction. I retract my earlier statement that he is undoubtedly bringing personal issues to work. The future does not appear bright. The two of them came to my desk as I listened to Susan's too beautiful voice, fearing what was about to happen. "Susan, this is Will, the one who developed that product our company is famous for. It's good to meet you. My name is Will. Whoa, it was developed by someone as young and gifted as you. Working with you is such an honor. I am excited about it." Susan resigned from her previous position due to disagreements with her coworkers. Being the boss's daughter and having such a gorgeous face makes jealousy inevitable. "Stop it, Papa." Susan responded, "That's embarrassing," but she didn't appear overly upset. Doesn't she sense how uncomfortable everyone is becoming around her? These two. Therefore, please treat her with kindness. Will, you know I'm counting on you. Sure. How about tonight's welcome party? You proceed to make the arrangements. What? The president abruptly assigned Robert, who yelled in surprise. Tonight? I apologize, but finding a spot at such short notice. Additionally, many individuals won't be able to make it if you notify them the day of. Just claim that the president has given the order. There are several locations around. You'll find one if you put forth enough effort. It all comes down to willpower. Simply do it. I'm grateful, Papa. I'm excited for tonight, everyone. When Susan and the president had gone, Robert put down his work and looked about desperately for somewhere to go. He even persuaded the hesitant employees and attracted additional volunteers. Because to Robert's efforts, a respectable number of individuals attended the impromptu welcoming party that evening at a respectable location. Susan spoke. You might assume I'm not excellent at my job since I'm the boss's daughter. To be clear, I am capable of doing my task. Please trust me. I believe I'm even better than the other HR staff. Thank you. The HR staff appeared tense, and the room went quiet. Everything was about to blow up. Someone was going to say something at this pace. All right, everyone, let's give her a round of applause. Robert, aware of the stress, attempted to ease the situation by eliciting cheers. A few arid claps ensued. Now, may we have a toast, Mr. President? Get your glasses, everyone. Robert was making a valiant effort to maintain the momentum. Robert was the only one perspiring despite the air conditioning, making the room extremely cold. The poor fellow. Totally carefree, the president lifted his glass. All right, let's try our hardest going forward. Happy Susan's arrival to the company. A toast. The sound of glasses clinking reverberated hollowly in the uneasy mood. People broke up into smaller groups after the celebration started, and it appeared that they were enjoying themselves. The first person to commend Robert was myself. You performed admirably. It was difficult enough to find the location and gather everyone, but to start the party with that uncomfortable feeling. You did a good job. I swear, I started to perspire when I saw those HR staff members' faces. My thought was, something's going to go down. Yes, without exaggeration. Why she didn't fit in at her previous positions now makes clear. Exactly, No way that would have gone well. Susan came up as we were conversing. She said to Robert, "Would you mind giving me your seat?" "Oh, sure. Go ahead." "Hold on a minute. I couldn't say that. But I'm clearly not comfortable with this." Thus, my only option was to give Robert a bitter glance as he left. I didn't get to do more than say hello earlier, so I hope you don't mind me sitting next to you. Susan sat beside me after taking her glass. Let's have a proper toast. I was forced to pick up my glass and give hers a gentle clink because Susan was so insistent. "So, Will, do you have a girlfriend?" That was quite abrupt. I unintentionally expressed my thoughts. That's a bit sudden, don't you think? Well, that's what I'm most interested in. Do you then? Have you got one? No. Unfortunately, I don't. That's not unfortunate. That's super lucky for me. What? I'm not dating at the moment either. Finding a partner and getting married was something I was only beginning to consider. And what does that have to do with me? I'm delighted to have joined my dad's business. I never thought I'd run into such a wonderful man. I believe I'll introduce myself as a potential girlfriend. I can't wait to get to work tomorrow. Does she really like me, I wonder? A surge of fear overcame me, and I downed my beer all at once. People began dispersing as the welcoming party came to an end, with some going to karaoke and others to another party. I made the decision to depart after the first party and went outside the venue because I had an early morning the next day. Then Susan came up to me once more. "After this, Will, what are you doing?" "While everyone is off to karaoke, how about we get a drink together in a quiet place?" "Aren't you going home with your dad?" "Papa was sent home early by me. Now is the moment for the youth. Let's go, please." I looked around desperately for a reason to refuse her. In fact, tomorrow morning I have an early meeting with a client. I can't be late because they insisted on that hour. I'm leaving for home to get ready. Susan didn't seem to question me, even though it was a desperate falsehood. As anticipated, Will is constantly occupied. I suppose I'll go home as well. Going to the after party without you is pointless. Want to ride in a taxi together? No, I'm doing fine. I'll take one of the trains that are still in operation. But thanks. Enjoy your evening. Almost running, I made my way to the station. I'm fatigued. Man, more so than from work. When I boarded the train and took a seat, I suddenly felt exhausted. I nearly missed my stop, so I must have fallen asleep. In a panic, I leaped from the train just in time. Susan came over as soon as I got to work the following day. "Good morning, Will." "Good morning." After lying to her the day before, I felt a little uncomfortable. "Are you free this evening? What about dinner?" "Sorry, I have a meeting with a client tonight." I thought of another untruth in a moment. "Will, you're quite busy both during the day and at night." "I'll try again, but that's terrible." Susan then walked out of the room. "Will, it looks like the boss's daughter genuinely likes you. After yesterday, what were you up to?" "Me? I attended karaoke. You ought to have shown up." "What did you do in the end, Will?" "I had to use all of my strength to decline the boss's daughter's invitation to a bar. You were gone when I looked for you for assistance, so I had to go away on my own." "Sounds like she's really into you. Is that so?" "Isn't it clear? She's sufficiently attractive, so it's not too horrible, isn't it? However, let's put her personality aside for the time being." "Her character? I don't know. If she's just innocent and happy, that's okay, but more for the benefit of everyone else than for me." "Yeah, I really hope that's the case." However, Susan's terrible personality proved that our expectations were in vain. In addition to being lazy at work and abusing her position as the boss's daughter, she openly harassed the female employees who were well liked by the male staff. Some workers had even approached their managers to express their want to resign due to her. Since she was the boss's daughter, I wasn't sure at first if this was simply people assuming things, but one day I saw it for myself. Hey, you're Jennifer, correct? Why are you wasting your time flirting with the guys when you're so ineffective at your job? You ought to be working if you have the time for that. You don't get paid for flirting with men. My dad compensates you for your work. You're a nuisance, so quit if you're not going to perform your duties. I could tell it was Susan because of the setting. I couldn't tell who it was because the other person wasn't speaking. Why are you wearing such gaudy attire? Why have you come here at all? They don't fit you at all, so it doesn't really matter. Did you even glance in the mirror? She was ignoring her own actions while shouting some quite harsh things. Shall I intervene and assist? The door to the locker room swung open as I was thinking that, and Jennifer hurried out. We looked at each other for a moment. She had tears in her eyes, and they were crimson. After a brief moment of astonishment, she greeted me and sprinted away. Susan appeared as though nothing had happened a few seconds later, grinned at me, and remarked, "Well done today. Isn't the weather lovely?" Then she turned to leave. It dawned on me then that all the things people were saying about Susan were accurate. However, Susan had no regard for her reputation. I questioned whether she would make another attempt to ask me out today. She has been requesting to go out to eat or hang out on the weekends almost daily lately, but I have consistently turned her down. I sincerely hope she realizes how annoying it is. Susan returned as the conclusion of the workday drew near. You must accompany me out. I'll be really disappointed if you reject me once more. I let out a soft sigh to myself. This will continue indefinitely if I don't politely decline her. She is the boss's daughter, so I had been hesitant, but I made the decision to confront her. I apologize, Susan. I'm having a great time at work right now, and I'm not interested in dating anyone. I can't see you by yourself outside of work because I don't think I'll be with you when the time comes. I'm sorry. After truly apologizing, I turned to face Susan. She was shaking and her face was flushed with fury. I understand. I guess you're not as good as the other people in this firm as I believed. In any case, I no longer give a damn. She murmured this while still shaking, then turned abruptly and left. It was obvious that Robert, who had been observing from a distance, had heard us. I believe you went too far, Will. She was furious. This could be harmful. It's better to be clear than to leave things half-hearted, right? Dude, I have no idea. Don't hold me responsible for whatever occurs next. Avoid saying such ominous things. Nothing will occur, will it? However, Robert was correct to be concerned. Susan began to bother me the following day. Will, are you here? Yes. This invoice isn't going to be approved. Why not? Why? Since I stated so. Is that even a valid reason? She asked something along these lines one day. Will, did you do something to Jennifer from HR? She says she wants to stop, and I've seen you make her cry in the past. Well, wasn't that you? I nearly spoke, but I restrained myself. Arguments are pointless. She is free to continue the harassment as retaliation or to disseminate falsehoods. I will continue to perform my duties. However, I eventually hit my breaking point one day. Do you really think this kind of high expense will get approved? New initiatives on one of our primary goods require it. Kindly give it your approval. Don't become arrogant because you created a single thing. Without that thing, this business can function perfectly. That's why these expenses are necessary, to make it even better. Oh please, you're most likely just going out partying with that money while using product development as an excuse. It sounds like the behavior of an inept worker. We don't need someone like you around anymore, in my opinion. I'll retain you, albeit at a reduced salary. Is that your opinion? My dad's opinion is my opinion. Your monthly compensation has increased to $1,000. Think of it as a presidential decision. I get it. After that, I went to the president's office and took out the resignation letter I had kept in my drawer. The door was knocked on. Yes, that is Will. Enter. Pardon me. Keep it brief because I'm leaving shortly. What are you in need of? Susan is at issue. She has been bugging me for some time, but today she wouldn't authorize the product development costs. Furthermore, she referred to me as an inept worker and stated that I would receive $1,000 per month. The president yawned loudly as I was speaking. Is that all? It's gibberish, so don't take it seriously. It's not absurd. This occurs nearly daily. It has an impact on my job. Can you stop it? Stop it? You want me to fire my daughter as president? No. I'm requesting that you put an end to her abuse of me. She is harassing several staff, so it's not just me. Since she was a little child, Susan has been free-spirited. Her charm lies in that. Deal with it. Don't take it personally. This is pointless. He isn't even listening. I was expecting a serious statement from you. Susan isn't wholly incorrect, but the thing you created is fantastic. After saying those things to me, the president walked out of the room. I put my resignation letter on the desk after observing him leave. Susan's picture remained prominently placed on his desk as usual. I have to stop putting up with this. In actuality, I had been the target of a competitor company's recruitment efforts for the previous 6 months. The offer, which was a $10 million yearly pay, was much better than my existing circumstances. I was tempted by the offer, but I was hesitant because I thought I would be betraying my coworkers with whom I had grown the business. However, I made up my mind today. I had left the company that was owned and operated by that father and daughter. Will, calm down. I am calm. Please don't quit. Sorry, but I've reached my limit. Robert and a few other supervisors, coworkers, and subordinates attempted to stop me as I was leaving the office, but I was adamant. I went to visit the competing company that had been hiring me the following day. My phone rang at that very moment. President appeared on the screen. He must have panicked when he saw my letter of resignation on his desk this morning. I considered ending the call right away, but I decided it would be immature, so I responded. Hello. Will, what is this? Are you talking about what was on your desk? Yes. What is this? It was clear even though he was asking. As you can see, it's my resignation letter. I am aware of that. Why are you leaving? I believe I explained it to you yesterday. I heard Susan said some things, but I told you not to take it seriously, didn't I? It makes no difference if it was the truth or a falsehood. I'm leaving this company because I'm simply tired of it. You are aware of the consequences leaving will have on the business, aren't you? Product improvements will stall, we'll lose the majority of our revenue, and it will be difficult to develop new goods. Quit babbling and return immediately. The president was frantically attempting to stop me, but his words were all over the place. It's you who's spouting gibberish. After all of this, what are you saying now? I'm not returning. If you go to that other company, they'll just use you. I'm going there to make sure they don't use me. They'll entice you with charming words, make promises, and then abandon you. In the end, you will be used cheaply. The president was not going to back down. They're offering me $10 million a year. $10 million. On the other end of the line, I could feel him getting cold. You're correct. The offer is $10 million every year with a yearly guarantee. What say you? Are you able to match that? I'd like to remain if you can. The president remained quiet for some time. I have to leave. I'm going to the other business. I'm grateful for everything. Hold on. I'll pay the $10 million. All right. We'll see it through. Simply return. From now on, each year. That's going to be tough, isn't it? Yes, each year. I swear, every year. I would be sure to obtain it in writing, even though his reaction lacked confidence. I get it. You'll return then? Fantastic. Then return here right away. I hastily added a second criterion. He was gravely incorrect if he believed that money was the sole problem. No, There's one more condition I need you to agree to. Don't you think $10 million is enough? Are you really asking for more now? There was a noticeable hint of fury in the president's voice. Yes, I won't return if you disagree. You're quite brave. All right. What is it? Let it out. I want your daughter, Susan, to be placed under my supervision. Susan, beneath you. As my immediate subordinate, yes, and that's irreversible. I'll always be superior to her. Susan will continue to be my subordinate as long as she works for this company. Exactly. And regardless of anything you say to stop me, I'll depart permanently this time if she doesn't comply with my instructions. The president went silent once more. Let's not expect me to come back if that's excessive. I'll be heading out. Hold on. Wait, please. I really should discuss this with Susan first. Is that required? The president is you. All you have to do is deliver the command. I'm sorry if you can't do that. All right. I'll follow your instructions. You will report to Susan. I'll see to it that she hears you. Everything was grudgingly approved by the president, so I went back to my previous role. I went to the competitor's business to respectfully turn down their offer. Everyone welcomed me back to work when I was a little late. Were you planning to abandon me? That is really unjust. Will nearly appeared to be crying. I came back, didn't I? I was so anxious, I couldn't even sleep, wondering what I'd do next. Come to think of it, there was an earthquake around 1 a.m. There was? I was completely unaware of it. You were asleep, weren't you? Yes, indeed. More significantly, though, why did you return? Were you persuaded by the president? Yeah, I laid out a few conditions, though. What kind of conditions? I won't say it to you. However, here's a hint. The president's daughter will be employed here. This is it. Within this division. That's right. Really? Absolutely not. Working with someone like her is not something I want to do. Why did you impose that requirement? Don't be concerned. Since I will be in charge of her, I won't let her do as she pleases. I understand. You made that requirement for that reason. I'm still a little anxious, though. Susan then began working as my subordinate on that day. Send this out in the company email. What? Why don't you do it on your own? What was that? Susan abruptly changed her tone when I gave her a stern look. Oh, nothing. I'll see to that. It appears like she had a proper conversation with the president. By the end of the day, gather these materials. Have Robert look them over when you're finished. I don't believe I need someone to proofread my work. I'm capable of doing it flawlessly, most likely much better than Robert. A close man named Robert rolled his eyes. I'm the one giving you the instructions here. Robert gave me an exaggerated nod of agreement when I stated that. Understood, said Susan grudgingly. I didn't hesitate to give Susan assignments. With all the work, she was most likely, no, she was definitely, quite busy. Susan gradually began to calm down because she had no time to harass others. The working mood was gradually calming down. Jennifer, who sobbed as she left the locker room that day, remained employed at HR. We occasionally talk, and I'm happy to see that she's smiling again. Our year-end celebration is today. I haven't had drinks with everyone in a long time. Will, thank you so much for what you did. Really, it's nothing. I simply think that things are happier in the office now. That's not because of me, is it? Is that correct? I've heard a rumor regarding the requirements you imposed for returning. Robert sat in front of me, and I gave him a sneer. He picked up his drink, turned his head away, and left. I wanted to know why you would impose such a requirement. It just makes things more difficult for you, isn't it? Never would I do that. However, I've now come to the realization that it was for everyone else. Is that what you think? Yes. Now everyone is grinning. Thank you. The company's entire vibe has altered. I understand. I'm happy if that's the case. I suppose I will forgive Robert for his chattering. The business remained successful, most likely as a result of the improved lighting and ease of task completion. My subordinates were busier than ever when I was appointed to section manager. Isn't this due today? And tomorrow is the day for that one. I've already completed the tasks you assigned yesterday. Although Susan appeared to be busier than everyone, everything was done for the prosperity and peace of the business. She would need to continue working hard, and to be honest, her attitude had improved significantly since joining. I had not visited headquarters for 25 years when I intervened to resolve a conflict between two workers. One of the individuals involved, department manager Kenneth, became enraged with me and began to gripe. "Don't belittle me. Why are you here at all? An outsider. You and other worthless country bumpkins are not welcome here." A second later, Mr. Kingsley was standing next to Kenneth, his face red with rage, and he yelled, "What are you saying, Kenneth? Are you even familiar with this man? Hey, Mr. Kingsley, what's causing your distress? I take it that he's merely the new part-time employee." Kenneth's impolite comment caused Mr. Kingsley to sigh deeply, dismissed him, and bowed deeply to me. Eli is my name. I'm 48 years old, which is when most normal employees in any corporation would be at their best. I visited a phone app development company today. It was a tiny business that produced home video game software while I worked here. I was one of only 2 employees, and we use only our laptops to work on games in a small room. However, the firm took off after we began developing phone apps, and it has since expanded to the point that its headquarters are housed in a huge building in California that is so tall that looking at the top of it hurts your neck. They called me back for employment after I had been living in the country. Many youthful staff members appeared to have joined during my absence. I couldn't help but question whether they still required my assistance. I felt a shock on my shoulder as I looked up at the headquarters. A man in his 50s was staring at me when I turned around. We appeared to have run into each other. I stood in front of the entryway and said, "Sorry about that." The path was sufficiently broad for him to avoid me, yet it might have been my fault. The man snorted and looked down at me as I moved back and held up my hand in apology. I was a little annoyed that my return to headquarters had been interrupted, but I motioned him to move aside. With a heavy sigh, the man said, "Don't just stand around in the middle of the path like some clueless country bumpkin," and went inside the building. I dismissed it, pulled out my employee badge, and went into the headquarters myself. Where had the development section disappeared to? The number of years that had passed since my last visit was beyond my memory. I made my way to the upper floors to look for the development department, but I soon became disoriented because I had not visited headquarters for 25 years when I intervened to resolve a conflict between 2 workers. One of the individuals involved, department manager Kenneth, became enraged with me and began to gripe. "Don't belittle me. Why are you here at all? An outsider. You and other worthless country bumpkins are not welcome here." A second later, Mr. Kingsley was standing next to Kenneth, his face red with rage, and he yelled, "What are you saying, Kenneth? Are you even familiar with this man? Hey, Mr. Kingsley, what's causing your distress? I take it that he's merely the new part-time employee." Kenneth's impolite comment caused Mr. Kingsley to sigh deeply, dismissed him, and bowed deeply to me. Eli is my name. I'm 48 years old, which is when most normal employees in any corporation would be at their best. I visited a phone app development company today. It was a tiny business that produced home video game software while I worked here. I was one of only 2 employees, and we use only our laptops to work on games in a small room. However, the firm took off after we began developing phone apps, and it has since expanded to the point that its headquarters are housed in a huge building in California that is so tall that looking at the top of it hurts your neck. They called me back for employment after I had been living in the country. Many youthful staff members appeared to have joined during my absence. I couldn't help but question whether they still required my assistance. I felt a shock on my shoulder as I looked up at the headquarters. A man in his 50s was staring at me when I turned around. We appeared to have run into each other. I stood in front of the entryway and said, "Sorry about that." The path was sufficiently broad for him to avoid me, yet it might have been my fault. The man snorted and looked down at me as I moved back and held up my hand in apology. I was a little annoyed that my return to headquarters had been interrupted, but I motioned him to move aside. With a heavy sigh, the man said, "Don't just stand around in the middle of the path like some clueless country bumpkin," and went inside the building. I dismissed it, pulled out my employee badge, and went into the headquarters myself. Where had the development section disappeared to? The number of years that had passed since my last visit was beyond my memory. I made my way to the upper floors to look for the development department, but I soon became disoriented because the building had so many rooms that looked alike. At that moment, I saw the same man who had previously bumped into me. I was a little taken aback. He saw me too and said something right away. "Hey you, only authorized workers are allowed on this floor. No outsiders are permitted. Quit aimlessly and head straight to your part-time job." Based on my attire, the man must have assumed I was a temporary employee recruited on a part-time basis. Since I was dressed casually today, in a gray blazer, white shirt, and no tie, he most likely didn't believe that I worked there full-time. He waved me away as though I were a stray animal. "No, actually Here, we're occupied. Simply get to your part-time work." I was interrupted by the man's intense gaze as though I were unworthy of his attention. He must have assumed he would see me get off the floor. I chose to follow his instructions and get off the floor, so I resigned. However, the man grabbed my hand and stopped me just as I was ready to hit the elevator button to walk downstairs. This elevator is exclusively available to full-time workers. The man, obviously having fun at my expense, smiled as he said, "Part-timers like you should use the stairs." I became irritated when I realized he only intended to further humiliate me, but I didn't want to start a scene that would only serve his interests. I forced myself to control my temper and gave him a composed grin. "Oh, is that correct? I apologize." The man nodded in agreement with my response. I took a quick look at his employee badge, which had the name of Kenneth, manager of the development department. Well, Kenneth, I'll keep that in mind. I made sure to get a good look at Kenneth's expression as I made my way to the stairs, even though I knew it was petty. I continued to descend the lengthy stairs, floor by floor, but after going down a few flights, I came to the conclusion that trying to go down dozens of levels on foot was somewhat risky. Since I was merely going down, I initially believed it would be simple, but before long, I was out of breath. It turned out that the closest floor was a break room, so I went outside to take a break. Beside it was a kitchenette with a microwave, kettle, refrigerator, and even a vending machine. "Thank goodness," I said to myself. "I'll take a break and then make a call." I quickly finished the iced coffee I had purchased after realizing how thirsty I was. Just as I was starting to catch my breath, I heard my phone ring. The individual I was going to call apparently just gave me a call. "Hello, this is Eli." "Where are you?" The person on the other line sounded shocked. "I've been waiting for your call," she said. "Don't worry about that. I'll send a car to pick you up if you just let me know when you get at the station." "Where are you now then?" "Right now." Well, I was about to say I was already at the headquarters, but I stopped myself. Since it had been so long since I last visited, I thought it might be a good idea to take a look around the company myself to see how things were running now and what kind of employees were working here. With that in mind, I pretended I hadn't arrived yet. "I'm not at the station yet, but I'll be there soon. I'll call you when I get there." I ended the call with that excuse. It had been 25 years since I last came to headquarters, so even the older employees like Kenneth didn't seem to recognize me. Thinking about that, I felt a sense of excitement, like I was a kid about to explore some grand new place. But I reminded myself that at my age, it wouldn't do to be so giddy. Besides, wandering around too much might get me mistaken for an intruder, like what happened with Kenneth earlier. With that in mind, I decided to explore the building discreetly. As I walked around aimlessly, I passed by a meeting room and heard raised voices coming from inside. "Let's stop this, Kenneth. Someone's going to notice." Intrigued by the tense conversation, I quietly approached the door to listen in. "Who you think you're talking to? I could have you kicked out of the development department by tomorrow if I wanted." Recognizing the voice, I peeked inside and saw Kenneth, the same man who had been rude to me earlier. He said he could kick someone out of the department. Maybe he had some connections with the higher-ups. As I pondered this, Kenneth stepped out of the room and made eye contact with me. "Quit wandering around like a part-timer. This floor is restricted." Kenneth shot me a sharp glare. But another man nearby spoke up. "Wait a minute. Is this the new hire? The new part-timer for the development department? Great. Go get me a coffee. Hurry up." Kenneth, seemingly flustered from having his argument overheard, vented his frustration at me. I bowed my head repeatedly in a show of submission. "My apologies for the interruption. I'll get it right away." Satisfied with my response, Kenneth finally seemed to calm down. However, as he walked past me, he deliberately bumped into my shoulder before hurrying off. As I watched him go, the man who had stayed behind in the meeting room approached me. "Are you all right?" Kenneth can be pretty rough with both his words and actions. "Thank you. It's my fault for eavesdropping. But if you don't mind me asking, did something happen to you?" Remembering the heated argument from earlier, I asked the man. He gave me a troubled look, but after some thought, decided to explain. "Kenneth's father is either the CEO or a high-ranking executive here. We're part of the development department, but Kenneth doesn't know the first thing about development. Thanks to his connections, he was placed as department manager, though he always has his subordinates do all the work, then takes credit for the results, pretending to be a capable manager. His confession surprised me, but it also piqued my curiosity. That's awful. Nepotism. Ha. Please keep what I said between us." "I understand. I won't tell anyone. But don't you feel frustrated about having your work stolen? Is your work in development really something you take that lightly?" I had my own passion for development, which is why I couldn't help but press him on the issue, even though it wasn't really my business. "Of course I'm frustrated," the man replied. "But if I go against Kenneth, I could get kicked out of the development department. I love this job." He then grinned mischievously. "I've put up with Kenneth's antics because I love my work, but I've reached my limit. That's why I added a little trick to the data he took from me. Any developer could easily fix it, but there's no way Kenneth will be able to figure it out." His boyish grin made me laugh. "That sounds fun, but won't Kenneth try to get back at you for that? If that happens, I'll come up with another plan. You can't create good work when you're feeling stifled." Suddenly, the man realized he had been talking too much and looked startled. "I said too much to someone I just met. I'd better get back to work." "Wait, can I ask your name?" "My name's Ted." "Oh, and I'll get Kenneth's coffee, so don't worry about it." Ted kindly offered to help, but I shook my head and simply thanked him for the offer. "No, I was the one who was asked, so I'll make sure to get the coffee. You should get back to work." "Well then, I'll leave it to you." Ted smiled warmly, gave me a small wave, and headed back to work. After seeing him off, I called the number I had pre-registered. "Hello, this is Eli." "Yes, how can I help you?" Naomi, my secretary, answered almost immediately after the phone rang. "I'm sorry, but could you bring some coffee to the development room?" "Certainly. How many should I bring?" "Just one will do." After hanging up, I started thinking about why I'd been called back to headquarters after 25 years. Maybe I was brought in to deal with this situation. If that's the case, then I'll have to rise to the occasion. I steeled myself as I quietly entered the development room. Inside, people were preparing for a presentation, with Kenneth at the front reviewing some data. The data on the screen was likely the one he had taken from Ted. Kenneth was so focused that he didn't even notice me entering the room. Just then, another man approached me, possibly thinking I didn't belong there. But as soon as he saw my face, he let out a surprised gasp. "Wait, aren't you? Kenneth's presentation is about to start." I gestured for him to be quiet, and once he saw Kenneth begin his presentation, he seemed to decide to join me in watching. Kenneth started explaining the data smoothly, and the audience nodded in agreement, clearly impressed. Given how confidently he spoke, it was easy to see why he acted so arrogantly. However, his smooth performance only lasted for the first half. Midway through the presentation, the data on the screen suddenly glitched, and then the screen turned completely blue. Huh. What's going on? Kenneth frantically tried to fix the issue, but all his efforts were in vain. The blue screen suddenly switched to a shooting game that began playing automatically, accompanied by cheerful music. What is this? Kenneth scrambled to stop the game, but unable to figure out how, it continued on. He was quickly defeated, and after the game ended, a short video appeared on the screen. The video showed clips of Kenneth slacking off, napping lazily around the office, shirking work, and making snide remarks to Ted, exposing his bad behavior in a series of embarrassing scenes. This isn't what it looks like. There's been some mistake. Even though Kenneth was in a panic, he kept trying to fix the data, but no matter how much he pressed random buttons, sweating profusely, nothing improved. In frustration, he slammed down the keyboard and let out an angry yell. "Ted, what the hell is this? Your data is broken. Fix it now." The other developers in the room shook their heads in disbelief, while the upper management looked at Kenneth with shock. He had just unintentionally admitted to stealing his subordinate's work in front of everyone. The man standing next to me spoke up. "So this is Ted's data? What are you thinking, presenting someone else's work as your own? Ted, could you shut it down?" Following the man's instructions, Ted calmly walked over to Kenneth's computer and quickly shut off the screen. Instead of thanking him, Kenneth, shaking with anger, spat out his words. "This is your doing, isn't it, Ted?" As Kenneth prepared to lash out further, I spoke up, keeping my voice calm. "Kenneth, that's enough. You don't want to embarrass yourself any more than you already have." Everyone in the development room turned to look at me, their faces full of surprise. But the most shocked of all was Kenneth, whose name I had just called. Frustrated, he directed his anger at me. "What are you doing here? You're just a part-timer. Don't talk down to me. Where's my coffee, anyway? Useless country bumpkins like you shouldn't even be here if you can't do something as simple as that." As Kenneth advanced toward me, the man standing next to me stepped in. His face, red with anger, appeared beside Kenneth as he shouted at him. "Kenneth, what are you saying? Do you even know who this man is?" "Ha! Why are you getting mad, Mr. Kingsley? Who is this guy? He's just a new part-timer, right? Whoever hired this useless country bumpkin is an idiot." Mr. Kingsley let out a deep sigh at Kenneth's rude remarks. Ignoring Kenneth, he turned to me and bowed deeply. "My deepest apologies. Not only did you have to witness this embarrassing situation, but you were also treated with such disrespect. I'm truly sorry." "Why are you apologizing, Mr. Kingsley? This guy is just a part-timer," Kenneth sneered at me. Mr. Kingsley was about to scold him further when Naomi entered the room with 1 cup of coffee and headed straight toward me. "Excuse me, I've brought the coffee, CEO Mr. York. Sorry for the wait." "Thank you. I'm sorry to have bothered you with this," I replied, taking the coffee from Naomi and handing it to Kenneth, whose mouth hung open in disbelief. "Here you go, your coffee." Kenneth, who had been so confident just moments earlier, suddenly turned pale and began shaking. His legs wobbled, and his eyes darted around in confusion. Wait. What? CEO. Isn't this guy just a part-timer? What's the matter? This is the coffee you asked me to get for you, I said. Tea, thank you, Kenneth stammered, taking the coffee with trembling hands. He sipped it quickly before placing it down on the table. The other employees, witnessing the scene, glanced anxiously between Kenneth and me, while Mr. Kingsley rubbed his forehead in embarrassment, clearly overwhelmed by the situation. At that moment, Mr. Sullivan hurried into the room. It seemed Naomi had informed him about the situation. When he saw me, he casually said, "Naomi told me," and I was shocked. "Why are you already at the office, and what's going on here?" In truth, I am the CEO of this company. I'm also Mr. Sullivan's nephew, and though I hold the title of CEO, I hadn't set foot in the headquarters for 25 years. So, it's no wonder the current employees didn't know who I was. The only one who recognized me was Mr. Kingsley, one of the veterans of the company, which is why all this confusion unfolded. I was watching the development presentation, but it seems like there are quite a few issues. So, you figured it out already. That makes things easier. Please, won't you return to headquarters? Mr. Sullivan's request caught me off guard. When I was still a student, I had developed a now extremely popular game with my uncle. With the profits from that game, my uncle founded this company, becoming the president while I took on the role of an advisor, aiming to grow the company together. As times changed, we expanded into phone app development, and the number of employees gradually increased. However, in my pursuit of perfection, I often gave harsh feedback, which created a tense atmosphere within the company. When I was younger, I couldn't handle the stress of not getting things exactly how I wanted, and I even yelled at employees in front of their colleagues. I made them work overtime for days to complete projects, which eventually earned me the nickname the Drill Sergeant. It was my uncle, then the president, who always mediated between me and the employees, diffusing the tension. Seeing the troubled expression on his face, I decided to step back and move to the countryside, leaving the big projects to the company. I focused on developing simple yet quirky games, living off their modest earnings. That was 25 years ago. By the time I looked up at the towering headquarters building earlier today, my uncle had grown this company into what it is now, all on his own. As I stood before the building, I realized that stepping away and letting the company evolve without me had been the right decision. I hadn't expected to be given the title of CEO at some point, though. Snapping out of my nostalgic thoughts, I turned my attention to Kenneth, who was visibly shaken. Kenneth couldn't hide his surprise at the fact that I, whom he thought was just a part-time worker earlier, was actually the CEO of this company. By the way, Kenneth, you mentioned earlier that you could kick Ted out of the development department by tomorrow. What did you mean by that? Oh, that was just a bluff. I thought if I said that, everyone would believe I had connections with upper management and treat me favorably. I see. It's impressive that you could convince people with such a lie. You've got a talent for persuasion. It's a shame you haven't put that skill to better use. I wasn't mocking Kenneth. While his approach was misguided, I was genuinely impressed by his ability to make people believe in his false authority. But upon hearing my words, Kenneth collapsed from his chair, falling to his knees and practically clinging to me as he shouted his apology. I'm so sorry. No, stand up. If you're going to apologize, it should be to Ted, not me. Based on that video, it seems like there's a lot you need to make up for. Kenneth slowly rose to his feet, his eyes red and on the verge of tears, and stood before Ted. Ted, I'm really sorry for everything. I was always jealous of how you, despite being younger than me, kept coming up with innovative ideas. I'm getting older and don't feel like I can learn new things anymore, so I invite your creativity. I'm truly sorry for everything I've done. Kenneth placed his hand over his heart and sincerely apologized to Ted. Watching this scene, Mr. Sullivan looked at me with a thoughtful expression, clearly plotting something. So, How would you resolve this, Mr. York? I get it, Mr. Sullivan. I laughed, then turned to Kenneth, who remained slumped. Kenneth, from now on I'm going to personally teach you everything about development. And if you're truly sorry, you'll work together with Ted and support him going forward. Wait, I'm not getting fired. It seemed Kenneth had braced himself for the worst, fully expecting to be fired after his rude behavior in Ted's incriminating video. But I don't give up on people that easily. I enjoy teaching people who don't know the joys of development. It's like playing a simulation game where you nurture talent. It's fun, isn't it? So, from now on, Kenneth, I'm going to give you a thorough education. As I smiled, Mr. Kingsley muttered under his breath, "You've still got that drill sergeant style." Ha! The drill sergeant. Kenneth, trembling like a newborn fawn, was clearly shaken. The role reversal from his earlier arrogance was almost comical, and Mr. Sullivan couldn't help but chuckle as he tried to wrap things up. Well, he did retreat to the country